Okay, I'm just going to make sure we are coming through live on YouTube. Once I hear that, we will get started. Okay, gotta mute that. Hello and welcome, everyone. So we are about to get started. You can, in the meantime, post your anything that good that has happened or anything that's changed for you. You can post that in the chat using the hashtag win, and then we will get rolling in a couple minutes here. So I'm going to post my own win. Okay. So hello and welcome. This is Michele Christensen of One Noteworthy Life, and this is stream number 7 of the GTD book. We're going through the book section by section and reading and implementing. And I do invite you to post any questions, comments, thoughts, or ideas you have. It definitely adds to the discussion to pool everybody's ideas together. So while people are coming in, you can post any good things that have happened to you or positive changes you've made in the chat using hashtag win. I'm going to share mine. I have had a little case of plantar fasciitis, which is pain on the bottom of your foot, and I've had to rest it so I can't stand for too long. So I've been using the idea of contexts in GTD, that I have tasks I can do while in a standing context, meaning I'm on my feet, or a sitting context. And so I've been using that to rotate so I don't stand for too long. So that was really helpful, and I was really glad to have that idea. Hello, Sarah. Thank you for being here. And I do have dogs in the background. You might hear them already. So super chats will be available throughout this live video, and that's a way to financially support the channel and get your comment highlighted. And you can always comment later in the discussion section too, in the comment section, because that helps the discussion as well. So let me go ahead and I'm going to share my screen here. How's that? What do we like? Maybe this better. Okay. So we are working from the updated 2015 version of the book that's on your screen right now. And if you don't have a copy, I've put my Amazon affiliate link in the description, and I would love it if you'd buy it there if you need one. I do earn a small commission from that, and it doesn't cost you anything. So today we're covering the first half of chapter 3, which is all about the natural planning method. And there's some material in the beginning before the natural planning model. And then we'll cover the first of the 5 steps of the natural planning model, which is defining your purpose and principles. So let me go ahead and check the chat. Not much there so far. Okay, so one of the very first things, I think this is actually the first sentence we get into, is the ingredients of relaxed control. And this jumped out at me right away because the concept of relaxed control is so powerful. And David Allen, the author, boils it down to just 2 things, 2 ingredients. And hang on, I'm just going to check YouTube real quick. Let me know if you have any problems. It looks like my video might be frozen. No, it's all right. Okay, I think I got the problem now. Sorry for this. There we go. So this is the cover of the book. This is the 2 ingredients of relaxed control. Um, and again, what I loved is that this concept of relaxed control is so powerful, but David Allen boils it down to just 2 ingredients. And it kind of blows my mind. So the 2 key ingredients are clearly defined outcomes with next actions to move them forward, and reminders placed in a trusted system. Now, I would argue that you might be able to say 3 because clearly defined outcomes and next actions might be 2 different things, but either way, 2 or 3 is still pretty impressive. And he describes this as horizontal focus. Oh, that didn't work. Wrong color. Let me try this yellow. Horizontal focus. Um, in the next few paragraphs, right after he introduces this concept of horizontal control, we get introduced to the concept of horizontal and vertical focus. So I had a little bit of a hard time grasping this just from the material in the book. But I did find an interview with David Allen where he answers this question. It's only about 4 minutes long and it's linked in the description. But in short, horizontal is the day to day projects, things that you're capturing, your next action. And then vertical is how well those projects and commitments align with those higher level of focus, such as vision, purpose, values, etc. And in that video, he gives an example of horizontal control is, oh, I need cat food. Well, what do you do with that thought? Where do you track that next action? What is your next action? And then vertical would be, well, why do I have a cat? The other thing I like in this section is there's a quote from Alvin Toffler, which reads, "You've got to think about the big things while you're doing the small things so that all the small things go in the right direction." And I was really jazzed to see this quote from Alvin Toffler because I have been a fan of his for a while. He's a futurist and author, and I guess consultant, and a bunch of other things too. And he wrote a few really interesting books predicting a lot of what we now live with, especially in terms of technology, way before it was happening. So it's, just super interesting stuff to me. And I've linked his Wikipedia bio in the description if you want more information. So the discussion of the horizontal and vertical is pretty short. And the summary is that make sure you're managing all of those, like as you're managing all of your day to day, your inputs, your next actions, your projects, that it aligns with the bigger vision you have for your life, those higher levels of focus that we talked about, I think 1 or 2 streams ago, like the level 6, level 5 things. Okay, so let me go ahead and check the chat. All right. So one of the next points he makes is to not overcomplicate your system. These orange highlights are Kindle locations. Um, so one of the first points he makes is your system doesn't need to be complicated, and think back of the envelope. And he gives the example of literally like if you're sitting at a table or at a coffee shop or something, like you grab a napkin or an envelope and just sketch some ideas off. And he says that this is the highest payoff in terms of productivity relative to the effort you put into it. So this doesn't have to be super complicated. There's a text insert in this section which says something to the effect of, get your project and situations sufficiently clear and under control to get them off of your mind and not lose any potentially useful ideas. So in a previous stream, I referenced a video from Next Action Associates, who are certified GTD coaches. And in that video, they talked about this concept of overbuilding your system and how it's easy with all the integrations and push button tools and features we have. It's just so easy to make your system way too complicated. And I would even add that it's easy for your system to gradually creep toward being overly complex. Like you add one thing and then it seems like you need another thing. So you add that and all of a sudden there's this big complex system. And that video from Next Action Associates is also linked in the description if you need it. The next point he makes is about the idea that formal models and things like project management tools are not always necessary for all of us. In fact, they may not be the right tool for many of us. I think there are certain situations that absolutely call for that. Like if you're building a bridge or staging a music festival, you might need a very complex project management tool. But for a lot of other situations, you don't, and simpler might be better. And he makes the point that sometimes even going from something that's in the project management software to actual hands on work might require another less formal meeting. So, my takeaway from this section is not to assume that a better or more comprehensive tool will fix my problem. And I even put a note in my Kindle about how I can streamline my system. Like, I'm not building a bridge or producing a festival, so my life and work are actually pretty simple compared to a lot of people. So I want to have a system that reflects that. Um, and then the final point in this section is that informal and natural planning gives big results. So I am going to go ahead and check the chat. Okay. So next we're going to actually see what the natural planning model is. It's a 5-step system. Step 1 is defining purpose and principles. Step 2 is outcome visioning, meaning create a vision of what you want the outcome to be. Step 3 is brainstorming. Step 4 is organizing. And step 5 is identifying your next actions. And I do think that somewhere in here it would probably fall into one of these steps, but there needs to be a discussion of like constraints, but I think it'll come up later. Um, So these are some points he made about the natural planning system. So the best planner you have is your brain. And this natural planning model, it looks really simple. It's almost like duh, but it's because it is natural. It's what we tend to do normally. And in this chapter, he gives this example of planning dinner, and I'm going to go back to these steps and summarize it. And he says, like, let's say you're planning a dinner out. You might start with, well, why do you want to go out to dinner? Do I just want to not cook tonight? Are we celebrating something? Am I trying to get a new staff person to get to know the staff? Is it a romantic date? Like, what's your purpose? And then outcome visioning, like what would be your successful outcome. Maybe your staff person feels welcomed, or maybe your celebration is really fun, or maybe your romantic date goes well and there's another date. Brainstorming might be like, well, where do we want to go? What kind of environment do we want? What kind of food do we want? Organizing might be something like, well, let's call and see if this place is open. Do they have a table? Do I have a gift card somewhere that I can use? And then number 5 would be identifying next actions, like, okay, well, what time do we need to get there? Do we need to call a car and things like that? And I do want to give you my own example where I did not follow the natural planning method. And I guess in the long run, it turned out okay, but the project itself was an epic fail. So when I was first with my husband, I was really excited to have a boyfriend I was crazy about. And I had always dreamed of doing like romantic weekend trips with my significant other. So I planned a trip for us to Palm Springs, California. And I had been going to Palm Springs by myself for a while. It's about 2 hours away from LA. So whenever I needed to get away from LA, I would go out to Palm Springs. And since I'm smart with my money, I got a good deal because it was the middle of summer. Now, if you know this area at all, or if you've heard anything about it, like maybe you've heard of the Coachella Festival, you might know where I'm going with this. The normal summertime highs in that area are about 108 degrees or 42 degrees Celsius. And on that trip, I learned that he does not like the heat and he sunburns easily. So, yeah. Now, I knew that Palm Springs was hot, obviously, but if I'm just strolling around or sitting by the pool, I don't really mind it, and especially once it's past noon. He, on the other hand, was completely miserable and spent the entire weekend trying to avoid passing out and not get a severe sunburn. So I feel really fortunate that this epic fail didn't end things on the spot. But I think it's safe to say that I skipped at least the first three phases of the natural planning model when I was planning that trip. So, back to some points. So, the next point he makes is that the natural planning model isn't always normal. And it's almost funny how that in some settings where it really matters, we don't use the natural planning model or we miss critical steps. Next, he describes the unnatural planning model, which is how planning is often done. And he gives the scenario of a meeting, which I think a lot of people could relate to this, where someone walks in and says, okay, who has an idea or who has a good idea? And the thing is, you can't assess whether an idea is feasible or even a good idea if you haven't done these earlier steps. Like if you haven't determined like what your purpose and principles are, if you haven't figured out what a good outcome is, if you haven't really done any brainstorming, it's like, how do you know what is a good idea or not? And he gives some examples of bad outcomes, which would be things like people's ego getting in the way, office politics, or he uses the phrase creative constipation, which I thought was, you know, a descriptive turn of phrase. Next, he describes the reactive planning model. And I thought it was interesting that he describes this and says that the unnatural planning model, which is what people often use, is so unpleasant and so unhelpful that a lot of people just don't bother to plan. They wait for a crisis or urgency to happen, and then they get into reactive mode. So people are working harder, moving faster, doing more, and chaos ensues. Someone will realize that there's chaos happening and say, oh, well, we need to get organized. So people attempt to get organized. They might label things or draw boxes or charts or whatever. And then someone will say, well, let's brainstorm some ideas. And nobody can solve this. So they end up hiring a consultant who comes in and starts with, well, why are you doing this? What would be an ideal outcome? And what's kind of funny about that is, I have seen that scenario many times, and I'm sure other people have too. And it's like, why wait till the chaos happens and bring the consultant in? Start with those from the beginning, like why you're doing this and what a successful outcome is, and do that from the beginning so you don't get into chaos. The final point here is that effective thinking can make things happen faster and more successfully. Now, we've seen this idea before in GTD, and one change I've noticed about myself is that I am valuing my thinking time now instead of considering it wasted time. Like instead of saying, well, why do I need to spend so much time thinking about this and analyzing it? Why can't I just do it? And I do need to think about things, and it's very helpful. So let me go ahead and check the chat here. I'll be right there. I'm just checking chat. Sarah. Okay. So, Sarah says, I had that experience with a trip to the humid South in the summer many years ago. Wish I had GTD back then. Thank you, Sarah. It is so nice to know I'm not the only one because that's a very similar scenario. So, thank you for sharing that. And yeah, that's a perfect example. I really appreciate that. Um, Okay, so these are again the five phases of the natural planning model, and today we're going to talk about purpose. Um, so he gives us a lot of good points about purpose. Um, One is to ask and be very clear on why you're doing anything. Um, and then he refers to this as, quote, advanced common sense. And I love that because it is common sense, but how easy is it to not do that? Um, Then the next point he makes is that it's very easy to create things and get caught up in the form of what we created and let our connection, that should read connection, with our real and primary intentions slip. And I can totally relate to this, where you get so caught up in something and you forget like why you're really doing it, and it takes on a life of its own. Then we have some examples of cases where you need to answer the why before you can answer the actual question. So he gives a lot of really good examples here. The one I pulled was like, well, who should I invite to this meeting? And before you can answer that, you have to say, well, what's the purpose of the meeting? Then he finally, or just about the end of this section, he gives us a bunch of benefits of asking why. And I thought this was such a great discussion. Um, so the first point is that it defines success. You can't have a win if you don't know what a win is. Second is it creates decision criteria. So it helps you figure out, well, how much to spend, how much time to allot. Um, all of these things depend on what you're trying to accomplish. It aligns your resources. And this one has to do with it helps you to and use your resources in alignment with the purpose of your project. So things like time, money, skill, people, space, you can use all of those things in a way that moves you toward your why. And there's a text insert in this section that says, if you aren't sure why you're doing something, you can never do enough of it. And I really like that, because how easy is that to do, where you just keep doing because it never gets done because you're not sure why you're doing it. The next point is that it motivates you. Like, how can you be motivated to do something if you don't know why you're doing it? It clarifies focus. Everything about your outcome or project becomes clearer once you know your why. And this can be really quick, and can be like 2 minutes or so, and it can help bring you back into focus if you've lost your focus. And this last one kind of surprised me. It expands options, because you would think getting clear about your why would maybe narrow your options, but it actually expands. And this was less of a concrete point, but he makes the point that once you have more clarity about your why, it can open up your problem solving and creative thinking. So I thought that was very interesting. So I'm going to check the chat real quick here. So, believe it or not, that about covers things for today. And I hope you can see the value of using the natural planning model, and maybe even begin using it in your everyday life. We're going to head into the wrap up now. So, if you have any questions or comments or final thoughts, type those into the chat now. I don't have the next stream posted yet, but we will be covering the rest of chapter 3. And then after chapter 3, we get into like the full implementation steps. But if you haven't read that far, you can still use all of these small ideas and parts, anything you want right now. So I'm going to go ahead and do the final check of the chat. Okay. Let me unshare here. Oh, Sarah, you're very welcome. Thank you for coming, and thank you for your comments. That was very nice. So, thank you so much for spending this time with me. I have really enjoyed it, and I hope to see you again. So, please do me the favor of hitting the like button and subscribing on your way out. It really does help me and my channel out a great deal. So, thank you very much, and have a great rest of your day. Bye bye.